right, we're live. Hey, aloha, love tribe. What's up? It's DJValerieBLove, and I have somebody here who's a retired police officer who got to change his life from digital forensics and taking care of the bad guys. Now he's helping you guys store your Bitcoin securely with SeedSigner. Welcome, SeedSigner. Woohoo!
Hello, it's great to be here.
Yay, I'm so grateful you're here. So tell us a little bit about your transition from law enforcement to seed enforcement.
It's been a journey. Bitcoin was on my radar and stuff several years before I left work in law enforcement. I was a police officer for 15 years, but I had kind of a non-standard path within law enforcement. I was drive a police car, pull people over, answer calls for a few years, and then had the opportunity to join a digital forensic working group about 3 years into my career. And from that point on, I was 9 to 5. Instead of going to a police station, I went to a computer lab and had, a desk with several computers, and it was my job to review digital evidence that was involved most commonly in crimes against children prosecutions, but I did work in other crime types as well. And I was the guy who, checked in the evidence and tried to obtain data off of cell phones and computers, thumb drives, hard drives, all that kind of stuff, and see if the information on, the phone or the computer, or whatever, either supported or possibly refuted prosecutions that were being considered. But was super blessed in that. But after 15 years, Bitcoin was part of what paved the path for me to step away from law enforcement. And I'm now super blessed to be a stay-at-home dad. And I have 3 wonderful kids that I tried to help shepherd through this crazy world and just kind of figuring it out as we go.
It's amazing. And so did you have the technical background before you were kind of assigned to this stuff, or were you more like investigative and then you started getting into the technical cybersecurity part?
Kind of sort of both. I've always been a little bit of a computer geek since grade school, and in college, I worked in the computer labs on campus. That was kind of when the internet, I'll probably date myself, but the internet was a brand new thing, and you had to remind people to type http://www before they would attempt to visit websites.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always kind of been tinkering with computers. I studied a little bit of management information systems before I went into law enforcement. But if you at the police station can, check somebody in on a computer or book somebody through the computer a little bit faster than some of the other guys, you quickly become known as the computer guy. And my chief knew that I had a background in technology somewhat as well. So that's what kind of opened the door to the opportunity with the forensic unit. But, beyond that, just standard investigative background, from all kinds of myriad different calls that you get in, suburban, I'm outside of St. Louis. So in the Midwest, from, fights to just like barking dog.
And then now here you are building an air-gapped device for people to self-custody Bitcoin or helping people. Yeah. So let's talk about SeedSigner. How did that come about?
It's been an interesting path. So after I left law enforcement, I don't need to go into too much detail on it, but I had a weak hands incident in 2017, early in 2017, as the block size wars were heating up and there were Bitcoin Cash just forking on and stuff like that. I was fortunate enough to have enough Bitcoin that if I liquidated all of it, my wife and I would be able to pay off our mortgage entirely and kind of start a new financial debt-free life.
Wow.
And very early in 2017, as the price was starting to rise, it kind of got to that threshold, and there's all these concerns about coins forking off and potential value dilution on the Bitcoin network. And admittedly, up until that point in my life, Bitcoin was more of an investment and less of kind of something that I saw as a solution for some of the problems in the world. So I decided that I probably wouldn't forgive myself if I lost the opportunity to have a debt-free life because some computer geeks were arguing about parameters and software. So in one afternoon, I very awkwardly, not even skillfully, sold everything on an exchange. But the plan played out. We, in fact, did pay off our mortgage, which paved the way for me to start thinking about leaving my career in law enforcement. So when I say I sold everything in 2017, that was early 2017. I did not time the market well. I was no sort of financial wizard in that regard. And for the rest of 2017, as the price continued to go up and up and up, like I didn't want to think about Bitcoin. I didn't want to hear about Bitcoin. I didn't want to be involved with Bitcoin. So kind of spent some time in my life focusing on some other things. And then in 2018, after the price bottomed, or started to look like it was going to bottom, maybe near, I think it was $3,000 or $4,000 that time. For whatever reason, I started peeking back at Bitcoin, and I started listening to the same podcasts, and I started spending more time on Twitter. And towards the end of my working time, I started more aggressively reaccumulating Bitcoin that I'd previously sold, but of course, it was at significantly higher prices, and you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve it at. So I started reaccumulating, wound up my law enforcement career. And as I was a stay-at-home dad, after I'd reaccumulated a certain amount of Bitcoin, I was looking to improve my security posture because I think being less confident about my storage setup may have been a factor the first time around that contributed to me just deciding to liquidate the coins. Because as a work-a-day guy from the Midwest, like the kind of gains that I experienced from having bought Bitcoin in 2013 and 2014 were the type of financial gains that people like me are not accustomed to. And you start to become concerned that you don't really have access to the funds, or that the gains somehow aren't real, or that this is just, it's, you probably get what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
So having this sense that maybe my storage setup wasn't the best the first time around, I'm looking for I'm looking for a way to update my cold storage. And just as I'm doing this, multi-sig is really starting to become a reality for average users instead of just for institutions, which is kind of how it started out. So the first multi-signature wallet that I became familiar with and had heard about was Spectre Desktop. And I had heard about that on a Stefan Livera podcast where he interviewed a security researcher called Michael Flaxman. And Spectre Desktop was one of the tools that they talked about as making multi-sig available just to, everyday Bitcoiners like myself. So I started looking closer at Spectre Desktop, and they also had their own version of what I would call a signing device, not a traditional Bitcoin wallet, but it was more of a, if you used it out of the box with the software, it didn't remember your private keys, but you would put a private key into it, and you could then create wallets and sign transactions. And when you pulled the power from the device, the key went away. And so you could use this to manage multiple keys. So I obviously have a little bit of a technical background, and this Spectre DIY is, of course, a do-it-yourself project. So I bought the components, and I put the thing together, and I started just kind of playing around with Spectre Desktop, setting up kind of test multi-sig wallets, test single sig wallets, just to get familiar with, their technology and the workflows and stuff. And one of the unique things about Spectre Desktop and the Spectre DIY is that they communicate between the two devices. So Spectre, for those who aren't familiar, Spectre Desktop is a program that runs on your laptop or your desktop computer. And Spectre DIY is a separate handheld kind of wallet-like device. And the way that these two devices communicate with each other is through QR codes. And for larger data sets, you show animated QR codes from one device's screen to the other device's camera and back and forth. And for me, that was such a kind of compelling solution to the issue that I'd always felt when I plugged a hardware wallet into a USB port. Because before that, I'd had a Keep Key was probably the first hardware wallet I bought. And since that, I'd probably gotten a Trezor and a Ledger. But every time I would plug that hardware device into the USB port of my laptop, like I'd cringe a little bit, because with my forensic background, you know that when you connect one device to another via USB, like things can happen that you're not aware of, or things can automatically happen. Like, drivers get loaded and storage volumes get mounted. And if, there happens to be some sort of malicious process or code on your computer, like other bad things can happen. And so in the back of my mind, it always made me nervous, because when that USB device is connected to your laptop, you don't know if it's communicating or not communicating, or how much data is going through it, or what, unless you're really, really in depth monitoring the serial bus. And this process of using QR codes to move information between the two devices, for me, was just super compelling. The first time I created and signed a transaction through that process, it was like the first time I'd ever sent a Bitcoin transaction, or the first time I'd ever sent a Lightning transaction. It was just, it was a revelation to me. And so I'm probably rambling here a bit, but I was really excited to upgrade my storage setup, and I wanted to get into multi-sig to kind of protect this Bitcoin that I've been accumulating. And Spectre DIY kind of inspired me to start tinkering with hardware, as well as interacting with the gentleman I mentioned before, Michael Flaxman, who was very kind to respond to a random DM from just some guy on Twitter. And I also tinker with 3D printing, so I'd created an enclosure for the Spectre DIY. And he started telling me about this idea he had to use a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is a very specific version of the Raspberry Pi that does not have wireless communication capability. So it doesn't have Wi-Fi, it doesn't have Bluetooth. And by virtue of that, it can act as this kind of perfectly air-gapped computer, where if you want to create a private key or work with private keys, you can have a pretty high degree of confidence that the keys aren't being leaked to, some sort of other device wirelessly. And if it doesn't have a data connection to any other devices, like I said, it's this very secluded, secure environment to work with private keys. And I started tinkering with adding, a display hat, a screen, and some controls to that Raspberry Pi Zero, and eventually a camera, and kind of created a smaller, less expensive version of what was the Spectre DIY. And that's kind of that was the genesis of the SeedSigner project, was just me trying to improve my Bitcoin cold storage security posture. And then I'm not a coder. I knew a little bit of code before I started this, but I actually had to binge on Udemy videos on Python to be able to create what were the initial versions of SeedSigner software before people who are better at coding than me came along and really started to improve our software and leaps forward.
Wow. Okay. So I'm on the website right now. So for people who are listening, you're obviously not going to see what we're on here. So this is everything you've been working on for how many years you've been doing this again?
Oh, it's been a little bit over 2 years. It was 2 years, whatever that works out to be, the end of 2021 and the start of 2022 that I published probably the first proof of concept videos and opened a GitHub repo and started figuring out how all that stuff works.
I mean, what's that been like for you? I mean, obviously, like you were going from, working out with all these people, and obviously we were in the lab doing forensics, but now it's like a whole different world that you're in, and what's it like? I mean, that's a big shift. And being a stay-at-home dad from being a police officer, those are big life changes for you.
No, I love that question. What is neat about where I am right now is every day when I wake up, it doesn't cross my mind, oh, I have to do SeedSigner stuff today. Like I wake up and it's something that I'm passionate about and it's something that I'm excited about. So the trick for me is more about finding balance between the energy that I need to be devoting to, my kids and, things I need to be taking care of around the house. My wife, of course, still works full time, and I'm go to the grocery store and make dinner, do the laundry, pick up around the house, all that kind of stuff. And the SeedSigner stuff, for some reason, is always like more enticing and interesting than sometimes the household chores are.
Imagine that.
Right. Or just like
Just
sitting
go
down and
figure.
losing 20 minutes on Twitter, like I'm sure everybody else can relate to. But yeah,
Um,
it's super neat in that I've probably I enjoyed doing forensics, but it was kind of something that I stumbled into, and I certain parts of digital forensics really appealed to aspects of my personality, but it was work. And I've never probably had this experience before where there's still some things that are just work with SeedSigner. There's no there's no way around it, but it's a whole different level of personal investment and just interest and excitement that is really fun at this stage of the game.
it's so cool. I mean, I love hearing people's like before and after stories, and I love hearing the bridge and like how they went from X to Y to Z, you know, all the way to wherever they're going. I think it's important for people who are out there who think like, "Oh, I'm too old to make a change," or any of that in of our own limiting beliefs, you know, that we put in place. And it's like, I just think your story is so interesting because of, you know, the it's not like you were just working in a tech office and now you're doing some tech stuff. It's kind of you were doing. I mean, they're similar, but this is such a different path. And then being a stay-at-home dad, which is super cool.
It's yeah, it's and I think part of the equation is also how I the shift in how I viewed Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Because when I first encountered Bitcoin at work, it was actually there was another guy in the forensic lab who was working a forensic case that it just so happened involved Bitcoin, and this was in late 2012 or 2013. And some local kid who had a really nice computer with two GPUs. It was a gaming computer. Had stumbled onto Bitcoin, and he was able. That was back when you could still mine Bitcoin profitably with a GPU and just a standard desktop computer.
Mhm.
And he was mining Bitcoin and then buying weed on the Silk Road and having it shipped to his parents' house, and then he would break it into smaller bags and take it to school. And he was making for a high school kid probably a nice little hustle. But of course, eventually somebody tells a teacher or the principal or something, and police get called. And suddenly, this coworker of mine ended up with his desktop computer, and it was around the water cooler one day. Just brings up like, "You've ever heard of this Bitcoin thing? Like, I don't even know what it's all about." And that was what started me down the rabbit hole. But
Interesting.
at that point in my life, like I was a young dad with, you know, daycare bills and a mortgage that was probably bigger than we were comfortable with at the time. So I was actively looking for investments, and I think that was why during kind of like round one of Bitcoin for me, which was the first several years I was involved with it, I think I viewed it more as an investment and a way to improve, my family's finances. And then, when I made the shift before that I mentioned, where it was less about making money and more about like the federal government spending way too much money. The debt at this point, the debt was what, like $14 trillion, and then it was up to 19, and we know where it's at now. As a person who's worried about his kids and the life that they're going to have and the opportunities that they're going to have, and how the
Mhm.
government may be spending some of their life's energy even before they even make it to adulthood,
Yeah.
I think that also made Bitcoin much more meaningful and important to me in terms of figuring out what I could do, what skills I might have to leverage to try to push or at least help a little bit push Bitcoin, forward a little bit.
Isn't it amazing, like, how our sh our worldviews shift because we're parents and we think about this. I mean, when I know before I had my kids, it was just like, I'm gonna go be this single person and cruise around. Everything's great. Now I'm like, I mean, I've always cared about the humanity in the world, but now it's like, wow, I really need to think, you know, reality, of like what world are we leaving behind for them and how am I contributing or neglecting, you know, it from this perspective, especially,
And I
I
think
just,
some of it's
yeah.
it's selfish. Like I want to be able to, when it's the end of the journey for me, I want to be able to look back and kind of be proud of the
Mhm.
work I did and be proud of at least trying to make things better for my kids as well as just, the other people out there. And I see Center is a very small expression of this, but we all kind of play our part. And try to do what we can.
Are your kids orange pilled?
No, and it's funny. It's not that
they think I'm
it's not
crazy.
that they're not orange pilled, but it's like, I don't know. It's so they probably 2 or 3 years ago they started doing chores, and I would pay them over Lightning with Bitcoin. They each got blue wallet, Lightning wallets, and whenever they, I had a standing offer for a long time. It still stands, but nobody ever takes me up on it. But for every day that your room is clean, I'll send you 50 cents worth of sats. It's not like a crazy amount of money, but it was designed to incentivize them to just like keep up with your room, keep it clean. And my daughter was probably the one who took me up the most on it. And I think they would have this blue wallet, and as Bitcoin, is falling from 60,000 or whatever down to 20 and then 17, they kind of keep asking me about the fiat balance that is reflected by the number of sats in the wallet. And I think that's part of the reason why it's been an uphill battle.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe in a bull market, that is when the orange pilling may occur.
It's true. I know I got the two teens. I mean, one of them won't even talk to me about it. She's like, "Shut up, mom." At least my son has some conversations, but he still thinks it goes down, mom. It's so down, down, down. And I'm just like, he's like, people have lost so much money. I'm like, you don't lose money. You have sats. A sat is a sat. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. And so it is an interesting conversation. Did you get in the Bitcoin Kids Month group? I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
so I mean, that to me is an important, initiative for all of us to navigate and get the kids talking to the other kids, about this, because it's one thing coming from us old farts, like, with
right.
our, they think we're in a cult and all the things that they say, but it's like, when the young people start having conversations about it that the younger people can relate to and listen to, I think that's going to blossom a lot of minds, and then when the bull run happens, that's going to be great too.
And I think like this is the perfect time to get started, because we're at a unique point started with like, trying to find the right messaging for kids who are 9, 10, 11, and then tweens and teenagers, because they are coming into a world, or will be coming into a world, where Bitcoin has never not existed. And I don't know that I know that I lived in a world when I was a kid where the internet didn't exist, but a short number of years after me, like these kids were grown, kids came into the world and they never knew the internet not being there. It may have not been as developed. There may not have been mobile phones that were ubiquitous yet, but like pretty soon we're going to get to a point where kids are just going to know Bitcoin as a different kind of money. But I think it like I have to applaud what you're doing with the awareness for the kids, because it is going to take some effort to get there and get the kids. It's funny with my kids. I think maybe I'm a skeptical person by nature, and maybe they have genetically inherited somehow my BS meter, because they know that inflation is a problem. And it's funny, you will hear like one of them talk to some random other grown-up in our family about how the government steals from everyone through inflation, but they just haven't totally been convinced that Bitcoin is the solution yet. I think it's still kind of some crazy thing that dad does.
Well, it really, and I can totally appreciate that perspective, because the kids don't really get it yet. And if we just had a spaces the other night with Renata from Fetty and Shooter Mike, and they were talking, because we were talking about obviously the global South and adoption in the global South, right? And like when we're talking about inflation here in the United States, and it's difficult to explain like why it's so important how Bitcoin is doing better than these other currencies in the other countries. And so it's if we can have those little pieces of data points to talk to the kids about and say like, then maybe they could have more perspective on what inflation really, like what problem Bitcoin solves in these other places, and that we're on path, like the way that things are going, that it's going to, be a solution for us too, as we keep, losing purchasing power through this
Yeah,
inflation. So
they're kind of in the ultimate insulation. American kids, I would say,
yeah,
especially, are like, it's like trying to explain the value of Bitcoin to another, just random person on the street in America who doesn't experience a currency that, we've had significant inflation for the last couple of years, maybe, but over the course of their lifetime, there has been inflation, but it's not so painful that it is impacting and hampering their daily life. Most people in America, you know, can get food, enough food to eat, and they have a job and they have a life and a place to live, with exceptions, obviously.
mhm.
But most Americans are going to have trouble appreciating the importance of Bitcoin. And then American kids on top of it, who, this day and age, like in America, so many kids are just whatever they want, it just kind of materializes. So
Exactly.
the problems that Bitcoin solves are really not apparent to a lot of kids, and it just
Yeah.
takes time.
It will. It'll take time, and I think it'll take time for them to start when they get out into the workforce and into the real world, and when they start understanding, like, whoa, because some of the conversations, I don't know about you, but my kids are just like, we should just work more hours, and I'm like, don't you want to have a life and not work 80 hours a week and keep
Yeah,
up with only being able to buy the same thing for more dollars, And so I think once it really hits home when they're out, it's gonna. I think they'll appreciate it more. So I'd be
yeah,
curious, because like obviously with this Bitcoin Kids Month that everybody's a part of, it's like we want to get all the Bitcoiners and all the folks supporting that. I'm curious about that kind of 18 to 25-year-old demographic. You know what I mean? And I'm curious if that would really be more, I mean, because you think 18 to 22, who knows if mom and dad are paying for college, if the kids are still going to college, there's that whole thing. But like once they start getting out into the workforce and then really having to pay for things themselves, it's like, is that a target audience that could really have some benefit from learning more about Bitcoin,
right.
in
And
a
maybe as the Bitcoin ecosystem gets developed more, maybe Bitcoin is going to solve some problems or develop some extremely compelling use cases for them. Like my kids play a video game called Rocket League, and it's soccer with cars is basically what this game is. It sounds super simple, but there's like a pretty big following. And in this game, there are of course these skins that you can buy
uh,
that are like special cars or a goal celebration or certain effects that your car makes when it accelerates or what it sounds
mhm,
like. And I think the seamless integration of Lightning into all of these kind of ways to acquire digital goods that are meaningful to kids in a way that people my age, probably doesn't quite resonate with us as much.
right.
I think Bitcoin, especially in the form of Lightning, has the potential to be a whole lot more useful to them in terms of being able to just buy things, without, generally, if they want to buy something like that right now, they have to get mom or dad's credit card, or the credit card has to be tied in with their account. Maybe
Mm,
there are account limits, or they need permission, or you have to put a PIN code in or something like that. But if you give your kid $10 in sats on a Lightning wallet on their phone, and they want to buy this Batman skin for Rocket League, like, there's no credit cards, there's no asking permission. Like, it just works potentially. Um,
so
so I think
interesting.
like there are some interesting use cases that maybe will even resonate more with kids than us once those are built out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things I started, like, I'm still only 2 years into this whole journey, and when I first started learning about, crypto and Bitcoin, um, I remember Axie Infinity was coming out, and it was like play to earn, and people were talking about,
Hmm.
and it was using these Axie tokens, and I was like, that's interesting. I'm not a gamer. I don't do, and that's just not my jam. But I was just curious about like, how can and it's obviously an attention economy type thing. So I was like, how can we utilize, you know, better tokens, like Bitcoin instead of this other crap, and help people still get those things done. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting. It's fun to learn and look and like see what people are doing. And
Yeah.
there's so many little niches that we're not even aware of, right? Like the kids and the young people have, like you said, as a use case.
I think what we have going for us is that Bitcoin is permissionless money, and if there's one thing kids hate, it's asking for permission.
Oh my God. I know. It's funny. I know my little guy, I call him little, he's 14, but he's like, Mom, I want to start investing in some stocks, and I'm just like, well, what are you going to do? And he's got a savings account. And of course I want him to go turn it into Bitcoin, but it's like, I have to set everything up and it's this guardian thing and it's all permissioned. And I'm like, is there a way for him to, you can't do it legally, obviously. But I think he would be excited if he could have permissionless, like, let's go do some trading or whatever. At
right.
But yeah, I think it's interesting. I wanted to ask about so let's go back to SeedSigner if you want. Like Cold Card, right? Even Cold Card, you still have to put the SD card into your computer, right?
Right. With Cold Card, and that's actually not a bad system. I prefer the air gap QRs, but the air gapping that you achieve with a Cold Card, moving that transaction data back and forth with the memory card, that's another good approach as well. Probably the biggest difference between SeedSigner and Cold Card that I may not have touched on before is like Cold Card is designed to store your private key. They have implemented, I think in the latest version, 2 secure elements, and they've put a lot of thought and time into how can we protect this private key from an adversary if they get a hold of this device and are trying to figure out how to access the funds that it protects. SeedSigner is kind of the flip side of the coin. And it's mainly due to because we're using inexpensive commodity hardware. That's another aspect of the project, is that SeedSigner is something you can build yourself. So we're using these commonly available computer parts that don't have any sort of secure element implementation in them. SeedSigner is the opposite in that it's like, we really don't want to remember your private key. So when you turn this device off, we're not going to remember anything about transactions you've done or wallets you've used or anything about your private key. So it's, I don't want to say they're fundamentally different models, but in terms of key storage, they are. And it's kind of like when you break a rule, if you break a rule, it should buy you something. And the whole point of the SeedSigner is that now, because the device doesn't remember your private key, you can use it to manage more than one private key. And you can use it to manage a single sig wallet, or one cosigner in a multi-sig wallet, or multiple cosigners in a multi-sig wallet. And in certain kind of like specific use cases, I think it's reasonable to share the device with like your kids. Let's say your kids wanted to each have some sort of small amount of Bitcoin in cold storage that they wanted to set aside for the future. It's totally reasonable for you to share the device with them, and you can each use it to set up and then manage your own wallet. So for like a trusted friend or relatives or that kind of thing, one device can really go a long way towards managing several different kind of on-chain cold storage setups.
It's amazing what's out there. And I still feel like, as a new person and as somebody who's not as technical as yourself and other folks, it's still like, that baby step moving forward. Like, I want to try some things and I don't want to mess it up, and it's nice to have, like, you've got all these great videos and explainers on your website. I love that you've got them, some different translations I saw in Portuguese and Spanish. That's pretty awesome. Like, how do you, like, for somebody like me, let's say just, simpleton Val, I'm a simpleton. How do you help people like me, get over the fear of screwing things up, with using these new tools?
Yeah, there's a few ways we can talk about that. And one is, watch an explainer video, especially if it's one from someone who you're familiar with and you trust, like BTC Sessions, I think, has done 2 SeedSigner explainer sessions where he goes from assembling the device all the way through to setting up a wallet and making transactions. Econo Alchemist has done another great walkthrough that was published in Bitcoin Magazine, and he put together some accompanying video material with that too. So one is just find the right explainer that shows you what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other aspect of it, I think, is testnet and or start with small amounts of funds and practice and get confident with it. A lot of Bitcoiners may not be as familiar with testnet, but it's essentially a parallel Bitcoin network where the tokens don't have any sort of real assigned value in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And you can set up a node. You can, almost all hardware wallets support testnet. And you can, it's primarily probably used for developers who want to test certain behaviors of programs that they're writing or test, core development, stuff like that. But anybody who wants to create a testnet wallet and just start practicing with a hardware wallet or a new software coordinator that they want to try, it's out there, and the barrier to try that's very, very low. And of course, start with small amounts of Bitcoin. You don't want to set up the absolute best way, whether it's Trezor or a Ledger or Cold Card, Bitbox, whatever it is. The best way to do it is to set the wallet up, transfer a small amount of funds to it, practice and make sure you can transfer a small amount of funds back to the hot wallet on your phone or an exchange or something like that. And then if you really want to be comfortable with that setup, delete the wallet and recreate the wallet using the backup that you documented when you were first setting up the wallet. So for most people, that's going to be in the form of one of these BIP39 seed phrases, which is either 12 or 24 words that you write down on a slip of paper or you stamp into metal. But you're going to feel a lot better about your cold storage setup if you delete the wallet and confirm for yourself that should the worst thing happen, if the hardware wallet happens to get bricked during a firmware update, or it gets lost or stolen, or for whatever reason the software you're using in your laptop becomes corrupted, whatever the reason is, you'll have a lot more confidence if you've proven to yourself that you can still access the money with just the seed phrase. And to chill SeedSigner a little bit, people that use SeedSigner are interacting with their seed phrase pretty much every time that they power the device on. So they understand the portability of private keys and how a lot of people kind of fall into this cognitive trap of once they have, let's say, a Trezor, and they set up a wallet and they deposit, whatever Bitcoin holdings that they want to the Trezor, they kind of have this mental model that the Bitcoins are stored within that little device, and that if something happens to that little device, it could be catastrophic. And what people don't understand is the Trezor, the coins are not stored anywhere, especially not on the Trezor. The coins are just on this communal ledger, and the Trezor is storing a copy of the secret or the private key that you need to be able to prove that you control those funds and to be able to move them, to other accounts that either, other Bitcoin addresses that either you control or that somebody else might control. But as long as you have those seed words, you can take that exact same Trezor wallet and access those funds with a SeedSigner or a cold card, or you wouldn't want to dump them into a hot wallet, but you could. If it was a disaster recovery kind of situation, you could absolutely enter them into one of several mobile wallets and quickly move the funds that way. The whole issue with that is once that your private key or your seed words touch a device that is connected to the internet, that's not cold storage anymore. It's a hot wallet, which is just kind of a different set of trade-offs in terms of Bitcoin storage. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but that's kind of, hopefully I got your question somewhere in there.
You did, for sure. And I think, yeah, it's like, doing little microtransactions, and I've heard, yes, wipe the wallet and restore it. What do you think about, at what point do you, as a Bitcoin holder, hodler, do you think is multi-sig the right way to go for people who have, a certain amount, or a 25th word? Is it called a passphrase, or
Yeah.
Is that right? So what, at what point do you know, like, because you were saying that like part of your possible hesitation, when you were in, phase one of your Bitcoin journey was that you didn't feel as solid perhaps in your security setup. And certainly as you saw it go up, you're like, holy cow, I'm not used to having this kind of wealth or this kind of numbers. And so, at what point, along people's journey, would you say like, yeah, it's time for you to like go to phase two of your security setup?
Whenever you start to experience that sort of nagging feeling that keeps you awake at night
Got
or
it.
makes you uncomfortable, that's the time. Whatever, as to your question about when should people start looking at passphrases or when should people start looking at multi-sig, it is really, the goal is whatever keeps you comfortable about your Bitcoin storage situation, whatever helps you rest easy at night. The other thing that I would throw out that's really important that a lot of people, we as humans tend to have this kind of idea that the next Bitcoin storage setup is going to be the last one, and that's going to be the one that we're just going to have forever. But securing your Bitcoin is really more of a process than it is any sort of end result, because while I think some of the technological mechanisms that are represented by SeedSigner are a leap ahead in terms of managing your Bitcoin, in 10 years, there may be another leap ahead. And security is an evolving, moving target that is more about taking reasonable measures to protect the value that you feel like you're trying to protect. And sometimes it's you wake up in the morning and there's this crazy green candle, and suddenly you have twice as much nominal dollar value as you did the week before. Or for people who are just really invested in the idea of Bitcoin and see the future where it's worth a lot more, in their minds, each Bitcoin that they have is maybe already a six-figure Bitcoin. And so for those people, you start to plan for where you think Bitcoin is directionally going to go over time. But I would just emphasize it's a process. And there's a great podcast that a guy named Antimus did on a podcast called Bit by Bit.
Okay.
And he kind of goes through this, I think it's like the 7 steps of Bitcoin storage, or your Bitcoin storage journey. And for everybody, there's a general progression. You start with a custodial Lightning wallet, or maybe a custodial on-chain wallet, or maybe it is an exchange account. And then actually for most people, I should say like exchange account is probably their first step. And then you may get that into a custodial wallet where you don't actually hold the keys, and you're interacting with the Bitcoin that you own through someone else's custody. And then the next step maybe is you download a wallet, a hot wallet, where you hold the keys on your phone, and there's no custodial aspect to the Bitcoin. So whatever company that the wallet is through could go away, and you'd be able to recover your funds through another service or with another tool. And after that hot wallet is then when we get into cold storage. And you might start with a single signature cold storage wallet with no passphrase. And then as you learn more about passphrases and get more comfortable with one, you might choose to add one, you might not. And then from there, we get into multi-sig. And with multi-sig, you could add passwords as well. But one really important rule is just like try not to overcomplicate your setup, especially if there are people in your life who you care about who may need to access the Bitcoin should something happen to you. But I think directionally with Bitcoin storage, what I'm most excited about is that with the Taproot upgrade that we've had in the Bitcoin network, there are going to be some much more interesting cold storage setups that people will have access to once those tools are built and become more mature. So if you can think of like a multi-sig wallet, let's think of like a very traditional 2 of 3 multi-sig wallet. You can create with these more advanced scripting languages, you can create a wallet that degrades in terms of its security over time. And that sounds like a bad thing. But what if you have this 2 of 3 wallet and you lose 2 keys, meaning you have no longer access to the Bitcoin. Well, you could conceivably set up a wallet where for the first approximately 5 or 10 years, we have to abide by this 2 of 3 policy, where you have to have 2 of the 3 keys that were used to create this wallet in order to access the funds. And then after just arbitrarily a 10-year period, maybe that degrades to a 1 key policy. And so that can kind of be a lifeline for somebody who had some sort of issue happen with their keys. And I just get really excited about these kinds of time locks and additional conditions that are going to bring some complexity, but they'll also add a ton of flexibility that I think people are going to find really useful as the tools mature.
So my skeptic, mind thinks, like, just as the one case you were talking about with the degradation, and maybe 10 years you only need one seed phrase to get your Bitcoin back. Is that something that hackers could identify if they looked on, and say, okay, this wallet has this this kind of, lock, but then in 10 years from now, I can go, apply my super quantum computer and hack it and get this Bitcoin. Like that's where my skeptic comes in.
Yeah, no, potentially there are trade-offs. It's my understanding, this is getting a little bit above my pay grade, but I believe the scripting can be done in a way in such that it's obfuscated. And so without some sort of special knowledge of, maybe they would acquire that knowledge, through social engineering someone. Mm-hmm. But I don't think just by virtue of the wallet's script and how it's set up, that's something that, a blind adversary could acquire. But your point is a good one, in that, like, people ask about the right storage setup, and it's all trade-offs.
Right.
Something like SeedSigner, I think, offers some really unique advantages, but it's a do-it-yourself, build your own hardware device. So with a device like SeedSigner that you build yourself, there's a certain amount of risk that you don't have anymore in terms of, it's generally referred to as supply chain risk. So at the Ledger factory, everybody in the Ledger factory knows that they're building hardware wallets, and they know that those are going to go out to customers who are going to use them to secure private keys and so on. And, the packages that leave the Ledger factory, there is some degree of knowledge that, there's a hardware wallet in this, or if it's on the shelf at a store. I think I saw a tweet the other day that people saw, I don't know if it was Ledgers or something else, like on the shelf at Best Buy. Wow. So that's a target. Like, I don't know if you want to buy a security critical device that way. Anyhow, back to the DIY aspect of SeedSigner, because you can buy these commodity hardware parts that are not Bitcoin specific and could be used for any sort of other nerdy computer science project. Mm-hmm. The risk that they would arrive to you compromised if you bought them in that fashion becomes a lot lower. Because out of all the Raspberry Pis in the world, they're probably not going to try to exploit every single Raspberry Pi in the world in case it might be used for some sort of Bitcoin purpose.
Got it.
So that it's trade-offs, and there's the trade-offs generally work along the lines of security and convenience. So the more security you want, generally, the more convenience you're going to have to give up in terms of being able to quickly access your keys, or in terms of the complexity of your setup and needing certain pieces of information or certain knowledge about the setup to be able to properly access the money and that stuff. It's trade-offs all the way down.
Yeah. And I think of just like with anything, right? With our technology, it's kind of like, cool, here's all of our data, Facebook and Instagram and all of it. We're opening up so that we can have this perceived convenience of social interaction at our fingertips, but we're paying the price with giving up all of our data in that way, which is, oh my gosh, it's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about this. So this is a love project. Obviously, you're not a big giant company making billions of dollars on SeedSigner. So people are donating to you. Like, is that the only way that you're generating revenue? How can we support you?
So there are generally 2 ways. So we have a BTC Pay server that Voltage has generously donated, and that is accessible through our kind of marquee SeedSigner.com website, where people can make on-chain or Lightning donations. We're also on some of the donation platforms where people can donate in a tax advantageous way that way. But
Like Geyser? Are you on Geyser?
don't believe we're on Geyser, but we did just get listed on OpenSats.
What's it called? OpenSats? Oh yeah, OpenSats.
OpenSats. Yeah,
Did they do
it's
like auctions and stuff there? I forgot. I saw something there
I don't
for.
know. I'm not sure if they do auctions, but they have a persistent web presence where they represent certain projects and kind of act as a go-between for people who are wanting to donate to those projects. But they also have, I believe, what you could describe as a general fund that if people just want to donate to OpenSats generally, OpenSats makes grants to certain projects based on, I'm sure they have ideas about priorities and what different projects are working on. But definitely OpenSats. I don't believe we're on Geyser yet, but that's probably something I should look into. So donations are probably the number one way that we can try to provide compensation to the collaborators who are working with me on this. And that's actually something that I haven't touched on yet that is super important, in that SeedSigner is by no means just me. The way things have evolved, I created kind of the initial proof of concepts that grew into what the tool is today. But early on in the project, people who are much better coders than me saw the potential of what SeedSigner could grow into be and were generous enough to leverage their personal skills and their abilities and their time to kind of grow SeedSigner into what it is. And it's not just coders. There are two other primary coders in the project, but there's they're Keith and Nick. Keith Mukai has also made some really important contributions to Spectre Desktop. He just got, within the last month or two, his first Bitcoin Core commits merged.
Ooh.
And then, go Keith.
Yay.
And Nick was actually the first person to collaborate with me on SeedSigner, and he's just a Bitcoiner who happened to find SeedSigner, I think, on GitHub. He just searched in GitHub for Bitcoin wallet maybe or something. Both super great guys, but also, there's when we upgraded our user interface, there's a UI UX designer who goes by the NIM of Easy, and he has added a ton of value to our project with his skill set in terms of upgrading the user interface to something that is much more polished and much more intuitive and graphically driven, and frankly looks much more like something that people would buy as opposed to something that they would build themselves. Nice. The initial interfaces that I created for SeedSigner were almost DOS-like in terms of the menus, and it was very basic. And now we have a very graphically driven, much more intuitive workflows that Easy's come up with. But there's, a guy that manages our web presence who I'm super thankful for. His name's Jay.
Hey, Jay.
There are people that have created all sorts of enclosure designs that are 3D printable to house the hardware. And one of the things I'm excited about is we have a new kind of influx of developers. There are about 3 or 4 guys who are starting to become much more active in the repo. And they're just able to take some of the workload off of Nick and Keith, as well as kind of start to take the project in some interesting new directions that, what do they say, with many hands make light work. And so it's exciting to see so many people contributing to this out of just an interest in building a tool that is useful to the larger Bitcoin ecosystem. And a large ethos of our project is, a lot of people in North America and in Europe who have access to hardware wallets, build a SeedSigner and end up deciding that they like it and they want to include it as a part of their cold storage setup. But there are certain parts of the world that are maybe politically more adversarial, where maybe Bitcoin is not looked upon positively, or you wouldn't want people around you to know that you're being your own bank necessarily, perhaps because of political governmental reasons, or perhaps just because it's it's a less safe environment. If people know that you're holding private keys, they might, try to steal money from you.
Mm-hmm.
And so for people in some parts of the world, hardware wallets are traditionally difficult to find. And like in Iran, as an example, I've spoken with a couple of people there over time, and generally hardware wallets are only available through the black market in Iran. It's not something that you're going to order through Amazon or directly through Cold Card or something like that. And it's kind of like a yucky feeling to be buying this security critical device through an untrusted channel,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing, what hands that hardware wallet's come through. And so SeedSigner, for people in those kind of environments, I really like to see it as a lifeline for people, to where if they want a cold storage setup that is better than a hot wallet, so they don't have to carry their funds with them around everywhere they go,
Mm-hmm.
it gives them a chance to have a better cold storage security posture by building something at home that they can source and not be signaling that they're interacting with Bitcoin in any way. And so that's just been kind of an important part of the project since I was invited to be a panel speaker at the HRF conference when they headed Miami a couple of years ago.
I saw you there.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And so
you gave away some SeedSigners there.
that was technically the Human Rights Foundation that gave them away. But yeah, I brought them with them. They very generously offered to cover the cost to make them available to participants. And that conference, like you were there, for me, that was an eye-opening experience.
Me too.
Just as someone who is less familiar with the struggles and difficulties that people in other parts of the world, you kind of, that it's hard in other parts of the world, but when you get to hear these people's stories and things that they've overcome, it makes it all much more real to you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been fortunate enough also to have a few people reach out to me privately and who live in some of these areas, who appreciate the opportunity that SeedSigner presents them, and being able to permissionlessly and kind of quietly build one is something that they have appreciated about the project. So that's something that we always want to keep as a big part of the ethos and the soul of the project.
I love it. And I think, like you said, like we think we know, like, oh, it's so hard, or it's, it's not as easy here, over in these places. But when you really see somebody speaking about their experiences with, these authoritarian regimes and their families being detained, or, being beaten by police, all the different things, that we take for granted here, as just like, oh, that could never happen to us. It's like Bitcoin does offer a lifeline, I think. And I look at, when after that conference, and I think it was in October of 21, like, cause I was only still maybe 9 months into Bitcoin. That sealed the 100% deal of like, I have to commit the rest of my life to helping people learn about this. And I need to learn about it too, in some way, and, music and peace and all that good stuff, which is what I do. But I didn't understand that this could be a tool for freedom, or, that it's a life or death situation for people, to be able to have access to Bitcoin if they can leave countries and get funding, in a way that is safe, so that they can, support their initiatives in their countries, So it was very, very humbling, and it woke me up a lot to go to that conference, for sure.
It was, and you might call it a trap that I had fallen into as somebody who is, a retired member of law enforcement. And I generally look favorably on the law enforcement community. I know that here in America, they catch flack, and they deserve it sometimes. Like, there are cops out there who just do dumb things, and even it's as bad things. But generally, as an American, like, we don't really live in fear of the police.
No.
And you have reasonable assurances that even if you are arrested, like, there's going to be due process, and you just hear about in other parts of the world, like, things that we take for granted in terms of how you're going to be treated by the police, or what kind of justification that is needed for you to be taken into custody, or any of that kind of stuff. It's just, again, like I said before, it's one of those you understand it's possible in other parts of the world, but when you start hearing the actual stories, it hits you in a whole different way. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's very important that we keep educated and not turn our heads the other way because it's too painful to look and hear, and I remember when I was standing in line to get in to that conference, there was a woman that we had met, and I was with my friend, and she'd never, she didn't know anything about Bitcoin, but I just told her, I'm like, it's human rights and Bitcoin. She's like, okay, I'll go, so we're standing there. And this woman, she was like, I'm like, what do you do? What's your job? And she's like, I'm a counselor and a psychologist. And I was like, well, what are you doing here? And she's like, well, I work with activists. Until I got in, and listened to everything, she was like, yeah, there's like a huge mental health uh, burden on activists and people who do human rights work and journalism and all the things, because you're putting, sometimes your life at risk to tell the stories. You're putting your life at risk to go get involved in different campaigns and whatnot. And I was just like, really? And of course, after the whole conference was over, I was like, oh
right.
my God, we need more of that woman, for all these people. Because just sitting in the conference as an attendee, I felt like just a tidal wave of stress, and that anxiety, right? And so I give so much credit to the people who are out there every day. Like, this is what they do. It's remarkable, the people.
Yeah, that's a real thing. And it during my time in the forensic lab, like it was a real. There's a phenomenon called compassion fatigue
Mm,
that is a real thing that I'm sure a lot of the human rights activists experience too, because you just encounter so many of these sad situations that call on you and demand that you have empathy, and
mhm.
just you can't help but feel other people's pain. And if that is, the majority of your experience for any sustained period of time, it can really weigh on you.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to ask your friend that you brought to the conference in Miami Beach. What was the verdict for him or her? Was it are they still intrigued by Bitcoin or
Oh,
the HRF? Or
yeah, both. Like, she's got Bitcoin now, and she's not as psycho as I am, who just wants to go deep dive and learn. And she's just like, I have it. It's over here. It's great. Leave me alone. I got to go do my life. Which is fine. Not everybody's going to be like, yeah, I want to go talk to everybody and have a podcast. It'd be crazy, um, but it's cool though. So I was really glad that that kind of turned her on to this tool, and so now she talks to other people about it. And, I think it's great. It was really great that we got to go experience that together. She's like my best friend and oldest friend, and
very cool.
yeah, it was really cool.
Those are
Um,
probably more of like the people that we need out there who aren't as like maybe psycho as you and me, who are just more level headed about the value proposition of Bitcoin. And yeah,
it's interesting too. I mean, it's like it takes the rainbow of all of us humans to like get the messages out there. And I look at us like we're kind of the Bitcoin marketing department.
right.
Even though there's, you know, um, but I think that's what makes it so interesting too, because like no other thing I'm not passionate about. I mean, I'm passionate about music as a whole, of course, and meditation and personal development stuff, but like there's no one thing that it's like there's so many of us who are just out here wanting to do it for the love of doing it, like all the folks on your team, right? It's like they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and it
Oh yeah.
benefits like selfishly, the network effect, it benefits all of us if we keep growing the network and fortifying it. And I think that's such a cool design, that has been made this way. I love Satoshi, wherever you are.
Right.
Oh my God.
It's a little bit mind boggling to consider um, what he, she, they gave to the world as a gift, and then
Yeah.
somehow we're just able. I I am extremely impressed by Satoshi's OPSEC to begin with. I don't think it was I don't think it was perfect, but man, it was darn good.
It's
Uh,
definitely like the history's one of the greatest mysteries,
right.
Do you know we're doing a cyber opera? We're doing Satoshi the Cyber Opera.
We don't know what is a cyber opera as opposed to a typical musical opera.
We don't know yet. We're working on that. No, we're doing, there's a huge group of us that are putting this together, and we want to, it's going to be a combination, it'll be like electronic dance music, tribal music, all sorts of fun, different types of visuals, but we created this story, based on, some of Satoshi's life. But then of course we had to, embellish, because we don't really know exactly what happened, but our goal is to use, music, art, and entertainment to orange pill the masses, right? Because it's one thing to go watch a BTC sessions video. It's another to sort of understand, like, wow, the system is broken. And I learned that because of there was this beautiful, performance at a festival that I saw, with interactive, we're kind of thinking like it's a combination of, if Cirque du Soleil and Hamilton and Burning Man and Tommy the Rock Opera had a baby, and
like went to a rave with Pink Floyd.
Precisely, and dropped acid with Jerry Garcia. And so, so it's going to be interesting. It's been fun. And that's what's cool, because it's like everybody who's on this project, we're all volunteering our time, just like, folks that are doing your stuff. So I feel like I just don't see that in other, vectors and industries in the world of people doing that. So I just think Bitcoin is so unique, and
there's no people volunteering at JP Morgan, I don't think.
No, they're not all going, yay, let's go have all these little, It's, so that's what I think, it's really special. So well, any last things you want to share with anybody, with the world, about SeedSigner and you and life, and how can we support you? I want to put your site back up so that people can.
I would just encourage people to, encourage people to, if they're curious. I probably haven't done a great job at explaining what a SeedSigner does. So just real briefly, basically it does everything that a traditional hardware wallet does, but it's something that you build yourself from off-the-shelf electronic components that you can obtain relatively easily on the internet, especially the Raspberry Pis. There was a shortage of those for a while, but the availability of those is really improving over the last few months, and it's going to get better in the coming months.
Cool.
So if it's something that interests you, check out our marquee web presence, which is seedsigner.com. We're not a company at all. We're not a product. We are just a volunteer open source software project that is just something cool that myself and a bunch of other Bitcoiners are collaborating to develop into a better and better Bitcoin cold storage tool that teaches you about the fundamentals of Bitcoin, about private keys and public keys and transactions and how they're composed and moved between devices in a secure way. Even if you do not decide to incorporate a SeedSigner into your long-term cold storage setup, if you use one and you play around with one, I will guarantee that you learn a fair amount about Bitcoin that will benefit you regardless of whatever hardware storage device that you want to use. And we also have a great Telegram group that you can find a link to on our website, where
cool.
If you want to jump in there and you have questions about what do I buy, or where can I find it, or how do I build this thing, or how do I use this thing once I have it built, there's all sorts of people who are enthusiastic and generous with their questions and answers in the Telegram group. And one last thing I will shill is a tiny little side project I've been working on, which is a Twitter account. And I think you're familiar with it, a Twitter account and a website that lists Bitcoin conferences kind of on a rolling basis.
Oh, totally. You made that Keller list. Here, let me put it up. What is it again?
So the URL is go-to-a-bitcoinconference.com.
Go to a Bitcoin. I love StreamYard because I can just do this. I like OBS, but this goes so quickly. So go to a bitcoinconference.com. Yay.
And there's a corresponding Twitter account that is just go to a BTC conf, CONF, where I'll retweet conference information and stuff. But it was really about as I was trying to look at 2023, I wanted to get just a sequential kind of sense of what conferences were at what time of year and where they were located and where I could find more information about it if I thought I wanted to go. So it's not a fancy website. It's just a simple HTML table, but it kind of just maps out the next 12 months. If you're looking for conferences in a different part of the world, you might find something that you hadn't heard of, or it might just help you plan out sequentially what works with your schedule. But I just throw out a small plug for that because I think it can be useful to a lot of people. Because at conferences that I go to, the core part of the experience that is so great is the other people that I get to meet. So I'm just bullish on people getting to Bitcoin events in different parts of the world.
It's like magic seeing humans in real time. I want to make sure I got the Twitter. It's go to a BTC conf, or is it conference?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
nope,
cool. On
conf.
Twitter.
You got it right there.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys go check that out and follow SeedSigner at SeedSigner.com and go to Twitter at SeedSigner. And then I'll, go to a BitcoinConference.com and Twitter, go to a BTC conf. But yeah, this is super important. I mean, and I got to see you in Miami also for the conference last year. You were up there on stage. So I was like, oh, good.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And so for those of you listening, if you haven't attended a meetup, if you haven't attended any kind of conference or anything, like just pick one and go. Like I go to the Denver Bit Devs meetup, and I am not a developer. Like, as you can tell, I told you I'm a simpleton, but I love being around other people talking about Bitcoin, and everyone is so nice and they want you to understand and welcome you. And so don't be shy. Like it's, when it's like being at Burning Man, everyone's so happy that you're there. Like, come on, yay, you're here, and I highly recommend just make a commitment. If you haven't gone to any, like go to one, like go do something, and then it's like going over the roller coaster. As soon as you get over, you're like, woohoo, that was fun. And so you keep going. It's really fun. But yeah, go to a conference for sure, my friends. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with myself and whoever's, listening to this on the recordings. Yeah. And I'm really glad that you're on this new path, and sounds like you get to wake up every day and being like, yeah, I get to do SeedSigner and I get to do Bitcoin. Like, I'm really happy for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate that. It's all about getting the Bitcoin off those exchanges. Let's drain the exchanges.
Dude, no more exchanges. Thanks. Bye-bye. Like, get them home to us. Yeah. Right on. Well, thank you again so much. Any last words that you want to tell the audience about their security setup?
No, I appreciate this opportunity to kind of share what we're working on, and maybe find me at a Bitcoin conference. I'll be at BTC Miami this year. So if you have questions or want to say hi, I'll be wearing this hat. So just look out.
Awesome. Yay, everybody. And make sure you go over to seedsigner.com and you can donate and you can learn all about how to set up your air gap DIY Bitcoin signing device. Yay. All right, everybody. Peace, love, and warm aloha. Thanks, SeedSigner. And we'll see you in Miami, my friend.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Yay. Hey, aloha. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, it would be awesome if you could help us out. Please like, share, and subscribe on all your favorite listening platforms. And our favorite listening platform is a value for value model podcasting 2.0 app called fountain.fm. What's cool is you can stream sats to your favorite content creators so that they can keep making kick-ass content for y'all. So go over and check it out. And until then, really just remember, you fucking rock, and I love you. Peace.